Hi and Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is ALIA binti ROHAIZAD and my student ID is 2025119003. So, for today, I will be presenting on the topic monthly allowance expenses as a student. So, the purpose of this presentation is to show the distribution of monthly allowance received by students and to identify the most common allowance range among university students. There are two types of chart and graph, which is bar chart and histogram. As a student, I often deal with monthly expenses that cover things like food, educational material, and personal needs. The allowance that students receive typically come from sources such as PTPTN, scholarship, or family sponsor. This presentation is based on how students like me manage and spend our money. As someone currently studying in Selangor, I understand firsthand how hard it is to manage money with the rising cost of living. Everything from food and rent to daily transportation is too expensive. To be honest, I used to spend my allowance on unnecessary things like snacks or items I didn't need. But over time, I realized how important it is to budget properly. Now, I try to be more disciplined with my spending by saving money for urgent or future needs.
Okay, so before we dive into the data, let's take a moment to understand the topic. When we say monthly allowance, we are talking about the money that students receive regularly, either from parents, scholarship, or also PTPTN. So this money is usually meant to cover our daily needs like food, transport, rent, and also school-related expenses. But there is the thing. Even though the amount of allowance each student gets may be different, what really matters is how we use that money. And that's what we are going to look at in this presentation. How students actually spend their allowance. Okay, now let's move on to the central idea of our presentation. We are focusing on the relationship between how much money students receive and how they spend it. You might expect that students will get more money would spend more, but that's not really the case. The data actually shows that even when students receive different amounts from 150 ringgit to 1000 ringgit, their spending patterns are quite similar. So this tells us something important. It's not really about the amount you get, but how you manage it. In other words, it's the habit, not the numbers, make the difference.
Now, let's move on the first chart, which is bar chart created by Kwang Min Ko in December 2014. It shows how students typically spend their allowance. The spending category include food, recreation activity, hygiene product, medicine or health, school materials, and bills. From this chart, it's clear that food takes up the largest portion, which is 25% of their total allowance. That is understandable since meals can cost at least 20 ringgit per day. The second biggest expenses is bills, especially rent, which many students need to pay it monthly. Third is recreation spending, which might include sport or hobbies, which is important, especially for active students. School material come next, including stationery, textbook, and printing costs. Medicine or health-related items follow after that, things like painkiller or flu medicine. And lastly, the least money is spent on hygiene products such as deodorant, cotton buds, or tissue. So that's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Okay, now let's take a look at the second chart, which is a histogram showing how much allowance students receive for each month. So, most of the students fall in the range of 200 ringgit to 400 ringgit, and 200 ringgit is the most common amount received. So, the average allowance is about 338 ringgit and 45 cents. If we look at the shape of the data, it's skewed to the right, meaning there are a few students who receive much higher allowance, like 800 ringgit and above. So overall, while most students are in the same general range, there is still a clear gap in financial support among them. Now, what does this data actually tell us? So first of all, around 73.7% of students depend on their parents for financial support. And here's the interesting part. Even though some students receive a higher allowance, it doesn't really change how they spend on a daily basis. The study found no strong connection between allowance amount and daily spending. So again, it goes back to what we said earlier. It's not how much money you have, it's about how you manage it. That's why financial awareness is so important for students. To wrap up the presentation, we want to highlight the importance of managing your allowance wisely. So one way to do is by setting a simple daily budget. For example, try to spend less than 50 ringgit per day. That's already a good start. And of course, always prioritize what you need instead of what you want. A little discipline can really go a long way, because in the end, being smart with your spending is not about having more, it's about making the most of what you have. So that's all from us. Thank you.